There is Mr. Daley in the flesh.
Good,
How are you?
thank you. I see. I could see you all along.
Well, I often say, I've got a face for podcasts. So, but if people can put up with it, then I'll. I like to use video on all these Zoom and Teams calls because I think it conveys something more than just the audio. Body language and communication is about 85% body language. So I think that's pretty poignant for even safety. So Mallory will keep watching to see when Steve arrives. Oh, there he is. He's signing in right now. He just texted me. So we'll give him another 30 seconds and then we'll dive straight in. That's a beautiful office you have there in St. John, New Brunswick, Mike.
Well, thank you, Don. It's just a little den here in our condo. We're looking right out of the harbor.
Oh, nice. There's a seafood place there that I when I've been at Irving that I like to go. I think it's right on the harbor. Granions, I think it's called.
Granions, yeah. We were there the other night, actually. Yeah.
That is my favorite place on the planet to eat lobster.
Well,
they have, I don't know if they have it now, but they had a dish years ago called the lazy lobster. And they would basically declaw 2 full lobsters and bring it out to you from the kitchen, steaming hot. And it was like the easiest lobster meal you'd ever have in your life. And you didn't have to work for it. So the next time, yeah, just add butter. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. It's not cheap, but they make it easy for you. So.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing when you if you make it easy and it's valuable, then it's worth paying for, right?
You bet.
Well, I think we're going to dive straight in. Steve can jump into the conversation and Mallory will let him in as soon as he arrives, and I'll do an impromptu introduction of Steve as soon as he gets in the room. So welcome everyone to this episode of the Industrial Innovators podcast. And this is a special edition, specifically an industry town hall on safety culture. And the reason that we put this together is we really just wanted to start to highlight an emphasis on safety, particularly in the Canadian industrial market, and start in this series to share wisdom from safety leaders. In other series we're going to do as part of this safety series, we're going to bring in some experts on culture design and on behavior design from a scientific standpoint, and round it out in our third series with some practical applications of things that people can do to really drive safety performance, to create strong cultures, and to never hurt anybody again. I'm the host, Don Cooper, and I'm passionate about this. I've been passionate about safety since I was a young university student on my first industrial job 30 years ago. And I instantly realized that there is a difference between safety rules and safety programs and safety culture. And I'm going to share my insights on how I experienced that even at 20 years old, 30 years ago. But this conversation is about our panelists, and I want to take a moment to introduce each of these awesome gentlemen. We've got Mr. Mike Daley. Mike he's a 40-year veteran in the industrial space, according to what he told me a few minutes ago, give or take 5 or 10 years probably. And Mike was the corporate vice president of health and safety for Syncrude Canada before he transitioned from an owner's organization into a consulting and a coaching organization. And he's now vice president of consulting with the Sacred Cow Company. Steve Cathrea, welcome, Steve. Steve Cathrea is another longtime veteran and gentleman that I've known for a lot of years. He's the turnaround director for Worley. And I'll give each of you a few moments to tell a little bit about your stories. And finally, I've got Tyler Douglas. And Tyler is the quality and health and safety leader in my business, Innovator Industrial. And so what I hope in this conversation we're going to get is the perspective of someone who comes from an owner's point of view and an outside consulting point of view, the point of view of a leader of safety and performance with a prime general contractor, and a frontline perspective with a subcontractor like our business. And I think those unique perspectives can give us all some really awesome ideas about how safety can be applied from a culture standpoint at each of those levels, because our perspective is that in order for there to be a strong safety culture, a created culture, it needs to be supported and believed in at all levels of that engagement. The workers are on the front line, and they are working in a facility for prime contractors and for subcontractors. And if there's any misalignment in terms of values and beliefs and behavioral norms, then that's when cultures can go awry. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and your background?
Hey, thanks, Don, and good afternoon. Hey, Steve. Hi, Tyler. First of all, Don, I'm really hoping that between Tyler and Steve, they're going to bring the wisdom part of what you're looking for. I'm not a subject matter expert on anything that you've talked about up to this point. Practitioner. My background's refinery operations, so I started at Irving Refining back in the 70s. Went out to Syncrude, Northern Alberta, like a lot of people, for a couple of years, and it was good for me and good for my family, and topped up my career there and retired from Syncrude in 2016. Headquarters is now in Edmonton, and do a little bit of contracting work. I'm not quite comfortable using the word consultant, but I do some contract work, and mostly focused on leadership coaching, field coaching at a number of operating sites, and with a couple of third-party service providers in a couple of different provinces, and also do some organizational risk assessments, working with folks. And it's just been great. Keeps me young in between traveling. And I wish I could say I was always as passionate as you were, Don. I was tended to be a high-risk guy in my career. And if somebody followed me around, I'm probably still high risk certain activities, but I catch myself, or I'm open to feedback. But certainly over the last 20 years, I've had a shift, particularly as my children independents have entered the industry. It's caused me to have a different view of things. And certainly, like I said, I started in operations, but about half of my career was on the maintenance and turnaround side, probably in turnaround more so than ever. And I gained a lot of respect for tradespeople, particularly people working in transient situations, and in terms of how they get set up for success. They're not sleeping in their own bed every night, and they get a lot of stuff coming at them. And as I look back now, I can see a lot of opportunities where they weren't set up for success from the owner's perspective, and even from some of the supplier perspectives. So that's kind of what turns my crank these days, to keeps me young and get to hang out with young, smart guys like yourself. So thanks for the opportunity.
I don't know about how young or smart I am, but I appreciate the comment. I think Tyler's the young, smart, good-looking one in the group.
I'll take it.
Mr. Cathrea, nice to see you, pal. Why don't we tell the audience a little bit about you and your background and your value system?
Sure, absolutely. Stephen Cathrea, I'm the turnaround director for Worley. Nice to see everyone on this call. Nice to see you, Mike. I haven't seen you in a while there, so great to be on a call with you talking about safety. It's certainly something that we've all been working diligently and as hard as we can to affect culture and different things along the way. And I think there's been a lot of ebbs and flows in that process, as we've all probably seen, affecting our projects. My background, I guess, started 35 years ago, basically as a tradesperson. I've worked both in the industrial and commercial sectors of the business as a fire protection installer, as well as a pipe fitter, steam fitter. So I do have quite a knowledge around the workings in the field, as well as I've been a supervisor, foreperson, superintendent, as well as a turnaround manager. Right now, my remit revolves around our North American union business, which is inclusive of 17, I think 18 sites now, of which we do turnaround work at most of them. So very busy and a lot of risk involved in a lot of that. Over the years, I've also had experiences at dealing with different companies. So, I was employed with the former company Jacobs for many years. We got sold to another company, Worley, 3 years ago. So that certainly has been a transition time. I've gained a lot of experience through both the companies, and there certainly are differing perspectives around what builds culture. I think part of it too is in the turnaround business, the limited time to build culture. When, as Mike said, we talk about a transient workforce, are certainly things that I look at closely on how we affect culture. And the easiest answer is to say, well, what Don said is we start with leaders, and it conveys its message down through the ranks, down to the workforce itself. There's been some interesting things over the last couple of years that have affected that, and one of which is COVID, and the inability for leaders to be on sites and get in front of people. And I think that's something to look at closely, is how are we engaging from a leadership perspective down to the craft and through our organization, and how are we showing that and instilling that. And then with the timelines involved in turnaround work, it's a difficult, there's certainly a difficulty in engaging culture in a short period of time. We find our maintenance operations, which are steady state, which are year-round folks that work on a site, the culture becomes embedded. And you look at ways at using that embedded culture for the new folks that come in on a short-term basis. That's part of it. So I have an interesting perspective as well, because I also have the ability to look at all our clients' sites. And there are certainly a lot of differences in operations dependent on where you are and the culture that exists at sites. And so that, to me, is another key consideration, is the partnership with owners and building culture is imperative to make that happen. And it's sometimes it's difficult conversations when we see that the culture it isn't where we believe it should be. I'm a lot like Mike as well, where I came out of the field. So I thank Jacobs for instilling a lot of things in me that I learned over the years, because I certainly didn't start out that way. So, and to me, Mike said a really important point, is that my family is also involved in the trades. And I have had my family sitting in the lunchroom while we're giving discussions, and some pretty hard discussions. Over the years, we've seen fatalities and other things that have gone on. And so the connection to your heart and to your family, I think, is something that is important in the culture aspect of it as well. And if somehow we get to where we're really putting forth efforts into a family concept, you think of it a lot differently if it's your family. You would not send your child out onto the street without a helmet riding their bike. There's certain things I think, and it certainly changed my aspect over the years when I had family sitting. And then not just that, but the long-term relationships that you see, where you see a lot of people come back year after year to the same turnarounds. And they're also family, because there's brothers, sisters, husbands, wives, kids and fathers working on these jobs. And so, you know, if we can capture that concept, I think is important as well. I could go on and on, but that's what I got for you for now.
No, that's great, Steve. You know what's interesting is two things that I'll share. One is from a family point of view, I spent half of my career in the corporate world of the specialty services space, working for guys like you, right, as a sub. But I've spent the last half of my career as an entrepreneur, and with all of those people, you know, all of my team working for me, and the buck stops with me. And but in both cases, I think the thing that struck me, culture comes from values. If you want to create a strong culture, it's got to be based in your values. And you mentioned family. My son works in my business, and he's actually listening in as one of the attendees on this webinar right now. The heightened level of scrutiny that I had the first time I sent him out as a pipe fitter apprentice was, and literally I wasn't on the job. I was handing him to other construction managers and superintendents who I trusted, not just to look after my business, but to look after my boy. That was a really interesting feeling that I hadn't experienced prior to that. I certainly had it for all of my employees, for, you know, over my whole career. But, you know, in terms of culture, you know, here is our core values as a business, and our number one core value is family first. And I think you've got to have a value system if you're going to have a culture that's going to protect your people, right? I think that's key. I think your message there about whether it's your family, I think you need to think about your people like family, because they all have families. They got to go home to their kids, their wives, their parents. And I think that's such an important aspect of driving culture, is having a value system about caring for your people genuinely. I think that was bang on the mark, Steve. Whether or not it's your kid or someone else's kid, it's someone's kid, right? Tyler, you got to, you know, you're the young guy on this call, and why don't you tell us about your journey through safety, because you've chosen to be a safety professional, and tell us about you and your journey and your belief system around safety and culture.
Yeah, first off, I just want to say it's great to meet both you guys, Mike and Stephen. Looking forward to some dialogue here and learning from some of your past experiences. So I took a bit of a unique road into the health and safety realm, in that I'm a trained firefighter paramedic, and that's actually how I got into the oil industry initially. So my mindset coming in as a 20, 21-year-old kid was on a more reactive basis, and it just came to a realization. Working a whole bunch of different jobs, I've been everywhere from remote drilling and service rigs, new construction, turnarounds, pipeline, basically every upstream, downstream service within industry over the past 12 years. And initially what I had realized is a lot of what the calls that I was responding to, the emergencies that we were attending to, were entirely preventable, for one. But secondarily, all it really took was a little bit of training and a cultural shift. It's a mindset more than anything to make sure that you're taking the appropriate steps and following procedures, policies, to a T, as opposed to taking shortcuts. And so, like I said, my mindset's just a little bit different, because I kind of work backwards, from worst case scenario to how to avoid, as opposed to, setting up from step one to avoid the incident or the event. To Stephen's point, one thing that I've tried to do, I've bounced around to a few different companies, especially during my turnaround life cycle. So bounced to quite a few different sites, quite a few different coveralls. And to Stephen's point, I've always tried to take some of the positives from different sites and different companies, and even as specific as a unique crew. Some things that I found a ton of value in, referencing back to family first, is creating a little pocket guide. I think that's one of the most useful tools You know, when guys are kind of towing the line and taking on a little bit more risk than they should. Something as simple as a photo of your family or your dog or whatever the case may be, something you hold close, you know, as you're pulling out measurements or a drawing out of your pocket, and that's kind of intertwined. You know, it just gives you that little mindset reset. You know, just wanted to touch upon Mike's comment about having a bit of a higher risk career path and some of the choice making as a younger individual. And you know, there is obviously we work in a high risk industry. You know, there's no debating that. And I'm sure from outsider perspective, a lot of the things I do in my life, I like fast cars, I like cliff jumping, you know, all that fun adrenaline seeking stuff. But the difference between being high risk is a calculated risk. And you know, you can have two and they coincide very well together. But the calculation is the key, and implementing the controls. You know, my experience in the health and safety realm has mostly been around face-to-face engagement, you know, being on the front line with the guys, you know, mostly field experience. I'm fairly new to more of an administrative office side of the world, but yeah, I'm just happy to be here to impart, like I said, a unique perspective from the emergency services side of the world.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. For me, guys, I got into this space totally by accident. I was in university and I was planning to be a lawyer, of all things, believe it or not. And to pay for that, I needed to get a job, and I got a job on the end of a hydraulic torque wrench as a 19-year-old kid who was trying to pay for tuition. One of my first journeys, when I was not quite a little bit, I think I was 20 at this time when I got this first, you know, real aha about safety culture and the difference between rules and culture. I was on a job in northern British Columbia, the demolition of a gas plant, working for a subcontractor. We were doing all of the scaffolding asbestos removal work while they were tearing down this gas plant, and working for a prime contractor, and I won't name any of them to protect the innocent. But what I, you know, not knowing what I didn't know, I mean, it was really interesting. I was on I got into the industry on the tail end of what were a much more higher risk tolerance in our industry, because on that one job, I got to see you know, for the first and only time in my life, I got to see an iron worker riding the ball on a crane. Not a lot of people have seen that in the last 10, 15, 20 years, I would suspect. I was on that job, and we still had safety belts, and they were just introducing you know, proper 5-point harness systems, but they didn't have lanyards. It was just a hard lanyard. So those were a couple of the things that I saw, you know, in the first months of my introduction into this space. But I was a university student, and before I was going to go to law school, I had to do all of these psychology and sociology courses, all about human behavior, and I found it interesting, but it was all going towards this law degree. And so I had an interest in human behavior because of that. And I remember being in this plant, and I was up about 3 pipe decks stripping asbestos. And as we would strip the asbestos, the iron workers and the pipe fitters were cutting it and removing all this material as part of the demolition. And, you know, for days, I would see metal flying and stuff being dropped to the ground, and people would flame cut a piece of pipe and drop it, you know, 20, 30 feet down to the ground to try to, you know, what I thought was normal rip and tear demolition work. But I was high enough up that I could see the site offices. And I remember this moment where I saw this whole group of white hard hats with yellow vests leaving the site offices. And then I noticed whistling. And I looked around, and all the behavior changed. All of a sudden they were using taglines, and they were not all of their actions totally transformed. And in that moment, I realized, there's a difference between how stuff gets done in that culture and what the rules are supposed to be. And I instantly realized culture isn't what is written down. It's what people do. And it's what people do when no one's looking. And so it was in that moment that I decided I got to dive more into this. And I started down the path of becoming a construction safety officer because I wanted to learn more about safety. And I never became a safety professional at full time, but I used that background to kind of guide my thinking as a supervisor, as a manager over the years. And I think it always intrigues me that, you know, safety is about behavior. It's about human behavior, and it's about values and beliefs. So that's you know, that's kind of where we all are, guys. And I think we all have very unique perspectives on this. And I think every one of us has seen good, bad, and ugly in this industry. Hopefully we're trending more and more towards better and better performance and progress. So on that note, you know, I initiated this conversation because with the energy crisis that's going on in North America right now, something really caught my attention. And that was in the last couple of months, there's been two major refinery explosions, one in Eastern Canada, where 8 people were badly burned. One of those people is a colleague of mine who is in the same industrial space. He's a longtime veteran of the leak repair industry. I have no idea of the nature of what he was doing when that explosion happened, but I do know he's in the hospital and he's got bad burns. So this is real close to me and real close to a lot of the people in our industrial specialty and here in Canada. And then there was another, a couple of weeks later, there was a major explosion at a refinery in Ohio that is now owned by Canadian energy companies. And 2 people were burned in that explosion and killed. And of course, we know about the rash of fatalities that has led to a lot of change in the oil sands in recent months. And so I guess my question, you know, to start the conversation, to dive in beyond who we are, is where's our industry at in terms of reaching zero? Like, what is the journey from your perspectives? Mike.
Great question. Actually, it's great listening to you guys. Already covered quite a bit of material there, which is good. I should have been writing that down, but it's a great question, and I think my answer is probably going to be all over the map. I think that's where the results are. The results are all over the map, and kind of left me with a couple of thoughts, maybe more questions than thoughts. And certainly, there's a number of slogans out there which are good, like "Journey to Zero," "Road to Zero," "Zero whatever," and it's a great aspirational target. And then I applaud organizations that are putting that vision out in front of people. I think, unfortunately, the intellectual understanding that goes with that, with good old plain old-fashioned leaders like myself, a lot of us, when it got rolled out in different organizations, weren't equipped to really understand what it meant. What did it mean for us as a leader? And that, you know, it's much more than putting up banners and posters and giving people high fives when they say, "Oh, we've gone 15 days without hurting anybody." And I would assert that organizations that still talk about how many days they've gone without an injury are probably doomed to failure, because they're really focusing on the lagging indicators, you know, and certainly they need to celebrate those milestones. But the real question is, are they talking about the presence of the controls, like what's keeping them safe, or are they only talking about the fact that they went another day without hurting somebody? So maybe we'll talk about that maybe a bit more when we talk about culture. But I think from my perspective on the road to zero, I think that old cliche about it's about the journey and not the destination, I think that's categorically probably the only way to ultimately achieve the zero vision for a sustainable period of time. And then the other question would be, how do you know when you arrived, and do you really ever arrive, is probably the other question. And if nobody got hurt yesterday, does that mean you're at zero injuries because nobody went to the hospital yesterday? So I think it opens up lots of conversations and lots of questions. I think, unfortunately, a lot of the conversations are missing and they don't happen. Even the conversation, and I've seen some companies that do this actually, when nobody did get hurt yesterday, at the lineup meeting the next day, they'll say, "Hey, nobody got hurt yesterday, guys. Tell us what we did. Why did we send nobody to the hospital yesterday?" So it's just another way to kind of keep the conversation alive. The other perspective that I've observed, and I don't know if you folks have seen the same thing, but certainly the number of minor injuries has been reduced significantly over the last 10 years. And there's a number of very mature organizations that have very advanced systems and good people and whatnot, but they seem to go for months, like quarters, without no near misses, without any first aids. And all of a sudden, wham, they get like 2 medical treatments or medical treatment and a lost time injury in the span of 3 days. And while the world has changed since some of those benchmark studies were done going back 50, 60, 80 years ago with the old pyramid, it is still hard to fathom how people could work safely all along and then all of a sudden have a couple of events happen. And, I would offer up that certainly training, PPE, procedures, rules have all got a lot better over the years. But I personally believe while there's always been a lot of there's always been some degree of underreporting in different organizations. I honestly believe there's a fair amount of underreporting that goes on today, just from my own experiences. And I think there's a number of things conspire against that. And one of them might conspire is the road to zero. Like nobody wants to be the person that causes their boss's scorecard to go red, or be the reason why, if you're a third-party provider, why you might get thrown off site, or whatever else might happen to people from an unintended consequence. But I think we certainly, about 15 years ago, we saw a step change in reporting for first aids for sure. When A&D testing went universal, just a lot of people would put their finger in their pocket, let it clot over, and go home that night and flush it out of it, right? I shouldn't say a lot of people. I mean, a number of people did. Reality was. And so A&D testing, the focus on zero, the focus on some leaders that might think it's more about blame as opposed to seeking to understand why the incident happened. I think all of those have robbed conversations to talk about not having injuries. So that's the downside. When all this gets talked about are the ones that you have to report. Like you can't hide a broken leg and you can't hide 10 stitches. So, and I'm not suggesting everybody's hiding things, but if you look at most of the injuries, they seem to come out of the blue. And certainly there's not a lot of low level injuries get talked about like they used to. And I think that's another aspect, an unintended consequence of culture. A lot of people felt they were punished for reporting some of the lower things. So anyway, it's kind of my spin on maybe a little bit of an intro in terms of where I think the culture might be, but also where a number of organizations might be on the road to zero, missing conversations around what are we focused on today? Like, what are the controls? What are the behaviors that we have to do to protect the zero, as opposed to just coming in tomorrow morning and high five and, hey, we did another day. Because if we're doing that, we're really just relying on luck, I believe. So a couple of thoughts there.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Stephen, your thoughts? You've been in an organization that, that has one of those journey goals.
Right. So that's an interesting point actually is around that journey. So, in Jacobs, the journey started with Texas City and the explosion and fatalities we sustained there. At that time, there was an identification, through the evaluation of that incident, that the culture was not there. They decided as a group that they would go outside the company to look for support to affect a culture change within the whole company, including leadership. That was really gauged upon, Mike had mentioned the culture of caring. So that was gauged towards the idea of caring for each other as individuals, not just from a worksite perspective, but also from a home and family perspective, and taking it with you and spreading that kind of culture, throughout your family as well. And so that was an effective program for a lot of years. I can tell you that over the years, the stats, so the new company, that acquired us, basically has a culture, but it's not similar to the Jacobs culture that they did have. It's not wrong, it's just different. So when we look at some of that, and I look at from our own company over yearly stats. In fact, this morning I was just looking at our stats for fiscal year 2022, not just around assurance and safety, but from a company perspective. We seem to, and this has been talked about actually for quite a few years, is, we got to a point where I can remember being on sites, and I won't mention the sites, but I was involved in a site where there was 5 fatalities in 1 year. basically, affecting a lot of people and affected me from a mental standpoint in a big way. And basically, I did leave the site, and I can tell you that a lot of it was around culture and what transpired. It looks to me today that we've kind of flatlined. We've gotten, we haven't gotten rid of them 100% because we know what's been happening up north right now around the fatalities. And it looks to me like there's a culture and shift change underway up there right now that's being proposed around human performance and exactly what we're talking about today around culture. I can recall that there was also that same initiative when I left there after the 5 fatalities. And so, the one thing is do we really all believe it, and do we really all want to make it happen? I think at times you need to look at. I don't think, so we've basically flatlined, and I've seen that over the years, that we still have incidents. We've gotten rid of the major incidents for the most part around critical work. A lot of it revolves around the smaller incidental kind of daily activities that in some terms become monotonous and repetitive. And then there's also a look at, some basic things like walking has become certainly prevalent in our industry, as well as a lot of slips, trips, falls, and a lot of stuff around hand injuries is what I see from today. I think we've taken steps forward at times, and I also think we've taken steps backwards. And I'll specifically point around, the economic realities over the last few years and how it affected, from a contractor's perspective, our ability to manage the projects and in turn manage the culture and safety of our folks. Very difficult to track, to look at leading indicators when basically, over the years we've been asked to reduce the indirect content of our organizations as a cost saving measure. And so that, again, to me, when we speak about where we are or where the culture shifts sometimes due to the economy. And it's really driven a lot of times by the owners on how that shifts. And then it affects our ability to manage leading indicators, to do those sorts of things that keep the program, robust and relevant. So to me, that's kind of where we are today. I think the other thing that I see a lot is that there's a lot of competing values inside of that. When you talk about values, there are values around equity, sustainability, safety. So there's a lot of competing values and cultures that we're trying to portray today, and sometimes that becomes overwhelming as well. And it, to me, at times maybe softens our approach at times. So that's kind of where I think we are today. I think there's still a lot of folks that basically are having difficulties coming out of COVID and re-engaging what we know was our values pre-COVID.
I think there needs to be an extra effort by all leaders and managers to probably over communicate and overemphasize and increase their visibility because of the changes that have happened, because these changes of how we all work over the last 2 years have been massive. And I think it I think the engagement with everyone, I think, is key.
Right. And so when you look at engagement, that it's a perfect topic because it's something that I've been looking at over this turnaround season. Is we've lost the engagement from a site. Let's talk about even just a site safety meeting. There are still a lot of places right now that we do not have a site safety meeting, and we're basically delivering the messages at the toolbox talks through the foreperson.
Right.
And that could be a hit or miss situation.
I've had client situations where I've had crews on turnarounds and on projects. I simply wanted to go out and be part of the safety meeting. And in order to do that, the client had, required me to go through 3 days worth of their site specific training to be on site for 2 hours. And I thought, what a massive obstacle to creating engagement, that there should be better ways to allow leadership to engage, because we don't, as contractors, and you're the same as me, Steve, one as a prime, one as a sub, but we don't live on one site, at least us from a leadership standpoint. We might have 20 different sites that we need to visit. We certainly can't maintain as leaders 60 days worth of orientations every year, right? And I thought that was an interesting, and that was really, really poignant during COVID, that you could not get anywhere. But some of those rules, bureaucracies, whatever that are put in place, I think create some barriers to engagement for sure.
Right. For myself, I had the ability, and because of my responsibilities, I did actually travel to all our turnarounds. I make it to every turnaround that we do every year, for at least 3-4 days, and try to support the team from a safety perspective, as well as just a site support perspective. I also, think that that's where we need to shift the culture back. It's one thing that I'll never forget is the time that our Jacobs executive leadership took to come to our sites and affect culture. I can remember one incident I used to have a mentor assigned to me in Jacobs, and that was a gentleman named Phil Stasi, who would come and see me at least twice a year. And he was located in Pasadena, and he had come up to a turnaround and basically engaged our craft in a safety meeting discussion, and was a very well-spoken communicator, and basically he had encouraged everyone to stop the work if it wasn't safe. And what he had told them was, if someone asks you why you stopped the work, tell them that Phil said I could. And I can tell you that when people left that meeting, they basically put stickers on their hard hats that said Phil said I could. And that, to me, again, is the effect of leadership in culture. Especially when it comes from a sincere and honest perspective, right? So that's where I think we are today. I think we are still finding ways. Some of it I look at, and I look at some of the incidents, and I say that we don't have the culture on that site right now because of the way this went down. And how do we affect change of that culture? It comes in many different ways, but it starts with us as leaders really engaging folks in a meaningful way.
Tyler, from a frontline perspective, we heard, talking about results and journeys and culture. What, give me your point of view.
Yeah, so my first experience in the industry came, I guess, probably mid to late 2000s. So I think at that point there had already been a start of a cultural shift towards the zero injury goal. It's funny because there's kind of, when I came into industry, there's a tale of two stories. There was, kind of the young guns who were being brought up and trained and explained what zero injury, what the premise of it all was. And then, there's the old boys club who was a little bit more resistance to change, which is understandable. That's human nature. But it kind of left this line in the sand when I was first coming in, and then it was interesting to see the blend from mentors to mentees, and it went both ways. Sometimes the young guys were picking up bad habits from the old dogs, imparting their experience, and vice versa. Sometimes the habits of the young guy and the prompt of being told to put your gloves on or your glasses on 15 times by a kid who's been in industry for 2-3 months. As frustrating as that may be, I think that was the first shift in the culture that I began to see, and it's definitely advanced, both culturally, through technology, through different types of controls, whether engineering, administrative, PP, whatever it may be, and just making safety. It's an industry standard now that everybody has a policy around safety, and it's usually one of the top selling features for any site or any company. So I think just having it as forefront as it is helpful in shifting that culture. But even more so, I think maybe over the last say 7 to 10 years, the hazard ID and behavior-based observation programs, I think, have been super beneficial to again just get that engagement from the frontline craft. Us 4 individuals, we can't be on sites 365 days with our crews, and the larger your company is, to Stephen's point, the more difficult that can be. It's very commendable to try and get there as often as possible. But some of these tools can be utilized so uniquely in not only trending, but also shifting focus of an individual. If they're continually inundated with issues of drops across the country, or even across industry, nationally or internationally, sorry. It just really does. It shifts the focus of straight production and task at hand to that little bird on the corner of your shoulder that's just chirping at you every so often to, hey, think about this. Here's a reminder of this. But I think the biggest key from the leadership side of things to continue this growing is closing loops and direct engagement. I think something that's seen far too often and grumblings from the front line is, I have to fill out these documents every single day, and it's a pain in my butt, and it's just a waste of time. I'm not getting any benefits out of it. I don't know where these are going. Is anybody even looking at these? So I think that's kind of a mental thing that I've made for myself, is to ensure that when guys are using these tools, that they feel like they're being heard, and they are. I think Mike made an earlier point about the underreporting and reporting incidents being seen as negative. I think that's another cultural shift that's continually progressing, and it depends on the culture and the site. But it's got to be a shift from placing blame of why did you do this or why did you not do this, acts or omissions, and shift that towards learning. That's the key. Is people are going to make mistakes. There's it's a human quality. No matter how prepared we are, no matter how experienced we are, there's always the tendency to error. So instead of dragging a guy through the coals and making it a negative consequence, take learnings and share the learnings and turn it into a positive, a reinforcement. And I think that's the way you need to tailor your culture. Every site's going to be different. Every crew is going to be different. Every company is going to be different. So you really have to learn how to tailor, what works for your guys to reach that zero goal. I think that's where we all want to be at. And like I said, Certainly in my career tenure, I've seen leaps and strides from where it was. And, I was never exposed to body belts or static lanyards or anything along those lines. But what I'm really starting to like is a lot of our frontline guys are bringing up new innovations and better ways to complete some of their tasks. So it's not necessarily just management pushing it down to the craft. It's got to be a two-way street, I think. And if we don't have the opportunity to have hands-on tools and complete the tasks at hand ourselves, that input can be vital for improving and continually getting closer and closer to that zero incident culture. And beyond that, trying to develop the culture within craft to craft. I think that's one of the more difficult things to try and progress is, you can explain all you want in meetings and in documentation, but it really has to be a buy-in from individual to individual. And once you start seeing that, it just kind of spreads like wildfire. You get one guy on board, and it's no longer seen as uncool to wear that piece of equipment or to take that extra step. It just becomes habit and routine, and that's where it develops from there. So I guess in summary, we're close to zero injury, I think. I again, to Mike's point, I think there is still some underreporting and burying of some of the near misses and that sort of thing. I think there's still tons of room for improvement, but I think as time progresses, we're getting closer. So the goal is not unachievable. It's just a matter of making sure we're taking the right steps and doing the due diligence to ensure that our people are set up for success, as opposed to just writing something out, putting it out into the world and hoping for the best. It takes a little bit more legwork.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. I'm going to double back to what Mike said about, the zero. And if our client, all of our clients and all of us often will write, how many days since an injury. And what that is, as Mike pointed out, it's a lagging indicator. Well, I'm not that smart, by the way. So I have lots of coaches who kind of give me their insight, and I spend a lot of time on this. I've got a coach in New York, business coach. His name is Keith Rosen. And Keith says, you cannot manage a result. You can only measure it, but you can manage behaviors that create results. And it was through that coaching that I got from him a long time ago that our cultural value that I wear on my shirt today, which is behaviors matter most, they create results. And management can report and measure results. The craft, they don't get anything out of that. But if you are recognizing and rewarding their behaviors and measuring their behaviors and recognizing that, you can start the process of engagement. From a perfection standpoint, Mike, you mentioned about, do we ever reach zero, or is it a journey? I've got another coach, his name is Dan Sullivan, and he says that perfection is trying to reach the horizon. That you can walk for days, but the horizon keeps moving. The only way you can measure progress is if you stop for a minute and you look back and you measure from where you came. And so I think that's he's got a book called The Gap and the Gain, and it's about measuring progress based on where you came from, not where you're going, because the horizon will always move. And to the point of Mike's point about underreporting, like I spend every day, as you know, Tyler, talking about safety and culture and how we're going to continually improve how we do things. And just 2 weeks ago, one of our younger managers called our operations leader and myself and said, hey, we just had a first aid. And I'm afraid if I report it to the client, we're going to lose our contract. What should I do? I said, you report it right now. Thank you for reporting it to us. And, we didn't treat him like, he was being ostracized. We just needed to give him coaching, saying, no, forge ahead, go to the client, report it. It's a first aid. We report everything. We believe in transparency. And, if for some reason we have a client who doesn't value that, I don't want them as a client. Like, I really don't. Like, I want clients who have a belief system and a strong safety culture at all levels. And, that's what we look for. One of the 3 attributes that we look for our clients, and it's defined and we talk about it all the time, is we want clients that have a strong safety culture, that at all levels of the organization, their values and beliefs are show up in behaviors. So, even when you are at it every day, some, and to Steve's point around Phil coming and reinforcing what a foreman might be telling them, even to this day, we need to reinforce things to young managers and young supervisors so that they feel comfortable with doing what is uncomfortable, because reporting an incident is never comfortable, because they may, as in their tenure, view it as their own personal failure or some risk of their contract or something like that. And we need to just be resolute that we are going to be reporting and encouraging reporting of all incidents so that you don't have 6 months down the line a rash of 3 injuries when you didn't even have a near miss for the last 6 months.
And I think that's one of the things that's so important is the continual education, and especially when things are going well, just reiterating how important the steps that are being taken are producing the results, because it can be forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's lots of great work on this around the leading and lagging indicators. There's a lot of people smarter than me who've written lots of great work on this. John Dewar wrote a book on it. There's a book on, called 4DX by Sean Covey. That was a great read on thinking about leading and lagging indicators. But the moral of the story in all of those is you can't manage a result. You have to manage and lead and encourage the behaviors that create results. Every one of them are consistent in that. And I think that kind of leads to the next part where, our industry, I remember the shift when we all started to, in some way or form, implement some versions or some interpretation of behavior-based safety. But when I talk to craft, and when I write about it and I get feedback on social media, it's all over the place how frontline craft perceive what behavior-based safety is all about, because they think it's about filling out a card. What is it, Mike? What is behavior-based safety all about?
Well, I don't know if I can give you the textbook example, but just to kind of pivot off something that all three of you said there, every one of you has mentioned the word reinforcement several times, and you mentioned behavior several times, which says a lot of progress in the industry is continuing. In terms of behavioral-based safety, and I'm a big fan of behavioral-based safety, and I'll say full disclosure, I never got to really work it and understand it too well, touched it from the periphery. You mentioned the tradespeople not liking the cards. Virtually every level of leadership I worked with didn't like behavioral-based safety and thought it was really stupid and bureaucratic. And I would say that's because they didn't understand the science. They didn't understand the behavioral science, what it was rooted in. And Stephen mentioned human performance, PhDs on both sides of the equations these days in terms of what is the silver bullet. The reality is there is no silver bullet. There's nothing new under the sun. It is all about reinforcement. It's about observing people, setting people up for success. Where I was starting to say, I don't know the textbook example of behavioral-based safety, but I'm also a big fan of behavioral-based leadership, which isn't a whole lot different. But I would offer up that behavioral-based safety is probably the intersection of humans and science and technology, and where they all come together to do things the right way. And certainly a big, one of the planks in behavioral-based safety is observing people. And it's certainly not to say they're a terrible craft person or a terrible human being, but it's kind of predicated on the belief that there can only be one best way to do something, and somebody else has probably shed some blood somewhere over the years. So here's the prescribed way to do it. It's no different like here's Granny's recipe to bake the cake kind of thing. And when they're being observed, they're just being observed in how they're doing following Granny's recipe. And that's where the feedback should stay at. The feedback should stay at how'd they do relative to what the task was prescribed, not for people to interject their own opinion on how good or bad a millwright or a boilermaker they are or what they did or didn't do. And that's where a lot of people have had bad experiences with the observation component of behavioral-based safety. But certainly you can't argue the science. It's indisputable in terms of people get a heads up. They know they're going to be observed. It prompts them to go dig out the recipe card. What's the right way to do it? And behavioral scientists would also say that after you've watched and observed somebody doing a task for, some people say 9 minutes, some will say 13 minutes, or people will revert back to whatever. I think you might have mentioned before, Don, or somebody did that. It's what people do when nobody else is present, and they forget you're there. So it's an opportunity to give them feedback after, and it's also an opportunity for the observer to get some feedback from another colleague that went with them, depending on the model that they use. But what it does provide you, and this is where the bureaucracy takes over, you end up with a paper-driven exercise. You end up with, in big organizations, as many as 7 levels of leadership. They're only worried about the paper flow into the right box and how many pieces of paper got turned in. And virtually nobody has that intellectual or technical understanding of what behavioral-based safety is, other than the good safety gal or good safety guy that's out there getting beaten, whipped on to go make it happen and make the paper flow. Unfortunately, that's where some of it goes. So I think that the science gets lost on it, but I'm a big fan of it when it's done right.
Thanks, Mike. Stephen.
Yeah, I think the behavioral based side of things, for me, I'm, and I've seen it over the years. So I've been through a lot of iterative changes, processes within our safety systems and behavioral based. And now it's the Worley way, which is, very common to a behavioral program. I think, to me, the program is designed to encourage people to do the right things when you're not watching them. And I think that's what we kind of lead towards. Then there's all the paperwork that Mike talked about that drives the processes. And, our lack of really investing in what a lot of times what that's telling us. I think when we're looking at that, there's differences in the long-term employee and the short-term employee. And I think, inside of the dynamics of that, we need to understand both processes and sometimes look at hybrid models that encourage a behavioral based safety program, but also, there's an accountability, I think, that sometimes we miss upon around the process. And I know that, we want learnings and we want, to progress and make people feel comfortable talking about these things. But I think inside of that behavioral based safety, there's also an accountability that's also a behavior that sometimes we miss upon and we don't take advantage of because of perception and maybe how we think it's going to affect culture. So to me, I'm a proponent of the behavioral based safety concepts. I think that when we look at application, a lot of times we need to look at complexity, magnitude, whether it's short or long-term service folks. I think it works a lot better in the maintenance world than it does in the turnaround world at times. And it's something, again, that I think is a tricky, stance to take, that if you're thinking about, going 100% behavioral based safety, I think there's also that discipline and accountability. And, I'll be honest with you, we can only learn so much about someone falling on a piece of ice. There's only so much to learn about that. The ice was there, you tripped on it, you made a decision to walk on it, whatever those decisions are, and behind that is one thing, but there really is not a lot of learnings other than we didn't eliminate the hazard and we accepted the hazard and we moved on past that. And I see repetitive issues pop up in those ways, and we go, we got a great culture here, and we've got lots of participation, And really, from a leadership perspective, you start to think about the accountability of some of those things. And so I think there's a balance. I don't think that we should shy away from holding people accountable. And I think there's tendencies at times to look at doing that because of, again, the culture that we live in today and the way the culture is moving today from a society perspective. And so we want to engage a lot of that. But there still is, you know, a look at both sides of that process, right?
I'm going to comment on a couple of things you said after I hear from Tyler, because there's a couple of really insightful things you said that I'd like to at least give you my perspective on. Tyler, what about yourself?
Absolutely.
BBOs
Yes.
and behavior-based safety in general.
Yeah, so I think there's always been a lot of mixed feelings since these programs began to be rolled out. You know, I think the number one from a craft standpoint is the idea of the rat card. Now, I think we've evolved to some extent from, you know, tattling on this guy for doing this to understanding more of the conceptual side of things of the trending and the ability to see hazards and events before they actually occur. You know, again, referencing back to that pyramid model. You know, from an investment side of things, I think the programs can be quite cumbersome. There is a lot of administrative work that's required, and of course a dollar figure that accompanies. And I think where most companies are falling down is a lack of training of the frontline guys of what the program's supposed to be, how to participate in the program, what kind of quality you're looking at. I think there's always been a significant focus, and I think, you know, Don, I think we're still guilty of it to some extent in our own house, of quality versus quantity. You know, you need quantity for the sake of getting guys into their routine and habits, but then it becomes a matter of trying to coach individuals into, you know, what you're looking for, what you're trying to trend, as opposed to, you know, Bob's shoes were untied again, or, you know, whatever the case may be. Now, on the flip side of things, I think there's a couple of significant positives that I have personally recognized from implementing behavior-based programs. Number one, probably first and foremost, is guys in field are constantly inundated with stimuli, whether that's, you know, procedures, rules, noise, congestion, whatever the case may be. I think that, you know, once you get somebody to buy into a program, it kind of removes the behavior of, you know, the head down, task in front of you. It shifts your focus, and you start looking at your surroundings and individuals that are, you know, in your area, and it just kind of, it opens your awareness to your surroundings and to what might be going on. Secondarily, and probably the most paramount thing is it's frontline owned. You know, so as much as management can still track and trend, realistically, in my opinion, the idea is to have frontline craft own their own and their neighbors' behaviors and hazards. So, you know, I think the old adage of you see it, you own it has probably been beaten up a little excessively, but it's true. You know, it negates Don's story earlier, where, you know, the white hats come out of the trailer and all the behaviors change. Well, now it's not necessarily a white hat. Maybe it's, you know, the scaffolder that's working a deck below you, or it's the, you know, machinist that's 20 feet away. Somebody is always kind of, you know, implementing the idea of a brother's keeper. There's always eyes watching. There's always some kind of trending occurring. And from that trending, you know, that's where we shift our focus to whatever the paramount issue or concern is of that day, that week, that month, whatever timeline, you know, that is put forth. You know, to Stephen's point, the ice. Yeah, you're right. There's only so much you can learn about a guy slipping on ice and, you know, the behavioral decisions that were made. But if you're getting, you know, observations of, you know, a half dozen people that have taken this goat trail, and it's an icy goat trail, well, now you can mitigate it. You can set up a barrier, you can salt, you know, so there, depending on, you know, how the company is using the program and the information and statistics and the data that accompanies, you know, you're right. There's only so much you can learn, but there is still something you can do about it. And you know, to further another of your points there, Stephen, tenure seems to be a major thing. You know, if it's I've done a handful of turnarounds myself, and I find that there's less, we'll say, pride in ownership. You know, guys know they're there for 4 or 5 weeks, and then they're on to the next. So they're not really buying into what's being offered as far as culture and the behavior-based program. They're just filling out cards or informing supervision for the sake of a checkbox, as opposed to really getting into the meat and potatoes of what the program is supposed to be and how to alter behaviors through said program.
Awesome, Tyler. Thank you. I'm gonna geek out for a little bit because I know the psychology of this stuff. So here's what behavior-based safety is from a science standpoint. It's based on a psychological concept called antecedent behavioral consequence. And I've got another friend and coach, and he's a partner in working on some safety and behavior workshop. His name is Dr. BJ Fogg, and he's the behavioral design lead for the behavioral lab at Stanford University. And and BJ says, and I think we all experience this, is that 85 to 90% of all the things that we do every day are automatic behaviors. They're automatic actions. We don't even think about it. Think about how you drove to work this morning. Did you remember getting in the vehicle, backing up? Do you remember every turn? Half the time we go through life and we do a lot of things that are automatic. Behavior-based observation at its core psychological point of view is to have an outside person observe the workers so they can see something that is invisible to them because they're doing it automatically. That could be a good habit, could be a bad habit, but it's a blind habit because it's automatic. And the point of the observer is to say, hey, I know, you did this great, you did this great, you did this great. I don't know if notice that every time you go to read that dial gauge, you take your glasses off. Did you notice that? And then he says, yeah, I have to, because, the foam inserts fog up or whatever, and then you can do something about it. But 99% of those behaviors that are at-risk behaviors are automatic behaviors that are blind to the person who is doing it because it's become a repetitive automatic habit. At its core level, if we could get everyone who does behavior-based observations, the frontline craft, to understand what your job is it's to make the invisible visible, we could make a big improvement. What I think a lot of our people feel is I've got to do an observation. It's a piece of paper. And then what is going to happen with it? I was fortunate, totally, separate from my study in behavior design with Dr. Fogg. In 2004, I had a great leader I worked for at the time. His name was Ken Tolan, and he rolled out behavior-based safety. And every single one of us went through a 2-day workshop on what behavior-based safety was all about, and how, as an observer and an observee, I should behave in that, what I'm supposed to be doing. It wasn't about the card, it was about the interaction. And learning that my job is, as Tyler put it, to be my brother's keeper, but the point of it is for me to see what Tyler is doing, because I know Tyler is doing it automatically and he can't see it. But if I bring it to the forefront, now he can be aware of it. We drive awareness and he can change that behavior. I mean, that's, if all we did in behavior-based safety was train people better in what they're trying to do from a peer-to-peer point of view, I think we would go miles in terms of improving performance. Now, from an insight standpoint, like, what do you do when you got 1,000 observations? How can we create some actionable insight for people to, barrier that icy path, before someone falls? And I think that's the biggest challenge, because when I talk to superintendents and construction manager friends of mine, there you got 500 people on site. They know everyone's supposed to do an observation. They got 200 cards back, but they don't know who participated and who didn't participate, and they don't have time to dig into the 200 to find out where the insight is about where there's a trend in a risk, to find those 6 observations where people almost had a slip and a trip so they could issue grips or whatever. And I think that I think the part of that that is key is the difference between an organic culture and an intentional culture. And I think, to Steve's point about new employees versus long-term employees, inside of culture design, one of the biggest things about being intentional is just defining what those behaviors are, and then having your long-term people who are sort of indentured into your intention around your culture to work closely with the newbies and say, hey, that's not how we do things here. Here's how we do things. And I think that's got to be key if you're going to have, because here's an interesting thing about humanity and civilization. We either have an intentional culture that leadership defines, or we have an organic culture that just happens, because humans are cultural people. And so if we don't create an intentional culture, you're going to get an organic culture that happens unintentionally, that we can't direct and guide. I think that's a really important part. But I think if we wanted to get tremendous value, one simple thing out of behavior-based safety is train everyone in how to do an observation and what the point is, regardless of the bloody card, regardless of the piece of paper. Because the piece of paper isn't for the men. The piece of paper is for someone in management like us to do something with it. But if from a peer-to-peer standpoint, if we just teach all of our people what we're trying to do is to make the invisible visible, so that you can protect, be your brother's keeper, and really help them understand that it's not about ratting people out, and it's not about filling out a piece of paper. It's about helping your peer spot an at-risk behavior that he probably isn't even aware of. I think that can be a really powerful shift. We don't have a lot more time left, folks. So, because we've dove deep into the details, there's still about 8 different parts of the conversation that I wanted to have. Maybe we will have another session and dive into some more of those details on another session. But before we take any questions from the few people who are still attending, I'd like to just go around and ask each of you, what's one big recommendation that you have to our industry? If there's one thing we could do that you think would impact keeping our people safe, what would it be? Mike?
Well, it's great. Great question. One of today's probably foremost thought leaders, one of the highest viewed guys on the internet right now is Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek talks quite frequently around, he's got a slogan around that a leader is responsible for the people in their charge as opposed to in charge of people. And you talk about the brother's keeper, but there's also an aspect of leadership in terms of leaders. And if you thought through everything that we've talked about in the last hour and a half around culture and behaviors and people knowing what they're supposed to do, if every leader, if their job description could be distilled down into 2 or 3 bullets, I know the world's a lot more complex, but if it was as simple as my only reason for existing is to make my people successful, and to make them successful, I'm going to make sure I can pinpoint all the expectations, like what does good look like for them, and not only that, I'm going to give them feedback on how they're doing, and they're going to get real timely feedback. And that would kind of go in concert with your point on the brother's keeper part. And you mentioned the ABCs and the antecedents, behaviors and consequences, and certainly that's what it's all about. And just kind of to pivot back to, Steve talked about the ice cleats or people falling on the ice, and that's the classic. That's the classic where all the adults, like, they've heard, exaggerate, but the adults that are over 40 in that industry have heard a gazillion times, you got to wear your ice cleats or use the designated walkways. And that's just repeating the antecedents over and over again. And if you kind of get back to, there's a formal behavioral base, the BBOs and the LPOs and whatnot, but there's also a lot of missed opportunities where leaders can be, can be shaping and molding the behaviors before it happens, kind of thing. And if you think right now, I know for a fact, at least 2 of the major sites on October 1st put out the edict that everybody must have ice cleats in their possession, right? And to Steve's point, you can't learn nothing once the person's already on the way to Northern Lights, they broke their leg. It happened, kind of thing. But if you just think right now in that region, there's probably 8,000 or 10,000 people that there's been an expectation that they have ice cleats in their possession right now as we sit here. And you can kind of predict, because it happened 3 or 4 times over the last 10 years when 2 or 3 people break their leg before Christmas, there's a major global stand down across the site, and 4,000 people will get to go sit in the tent and watch that movie again where somebody comes in and talks about wearing ice cleats and walkways. So that's clearly the lagging indicator and people reacting to it. But the point of influence for leaders right now, and this would be a challenge for all of us to shape and mold those behaviors we talk about, to reinforce how to stay safe on what are some of the controls. And you can kind of, this is a rhetorical question, but just think of the 10,000 people that supposedly are supposed to have ice cleats in their possession right now within half an hour of that region. How many people have been positively reinforced and thanked in the last week for having those ice cleats? And that kind of gets back to your point on the reinforcement and shaping the behaviors so that's the consequence. They're going to feel love and joy from someone recognize that they got their ice cleats with them. And if that can be reinforced over the next 3 or 4 weeks, by the time they actually need them, a big shift has been made in the culture. And to your point on the how do you shape the culture? You shape it through the behaviors, because that's, as you said, that's the behaviors, what people say or do. And that's what's really cool about behavior-based and leadership behavior-based, is that if we all believe that we can observe the behavior, then we can give people feedback on it. And if we can observe it, then we can count it and we can shape it. And if we can change the behavior, then we're changing the culture. So that brings together a lot.
Awesome points, Mike. And in all things that are simple, just leadership behaviors.
Absolutely.
Just do it. Like Mikey said, right? Stephen, what about you? What's your best advice, my friend?
I think, again, one thing that I've always found very effective is engagement of your clients. I've been through that with a couple of clients where engagement from a cultural perspective and participation has really changed outcomes on sites. And so to me, one thing I would encourage folks to do is seek out allies within your client organizations and have them come and participate at a craft level. And it seems to work quite well, and it really starts to build that culture of people on the same path. The second thing I think I would add into that is to make sure that it's what we talked about, that the programs that we are instituting, behavioral based, whatever that is, are relative and meaningful and followed through upon, because that's what we see a lot of times is that we're gathering information and then we're having incidents come out the other end that are directly related to our leading indicators that we're trying to garner, and that buys a lot of that culture acceptance when you start to put that out there. And I think if we don't do that on a regular basis, we start to get a program that basically is about checking a box and not necessarily about the true, heartfelt feelings of wanting to send everyone home safely. And so to me, those are the two things I think are important, is make sure it's relevant and also make sure that you engage allies within your client systems to help you in this process.
Love that. I love the be on site and engage the workers. I think it's so important. I think workers, not having to go through your foreman or general foreman to have relationships and reinforce things, I think is so important to create that. I don't know if it was Simon Sinek or who said it, but sometimes you got to say something 7 times before your people hear it once, right? Right. Tyler.
Yeah, I think my point is kind of a collective of the other two gentlemen. Don, you're well aware. To me, one of the biggest issues that stands with a lot of the programs that we have implemented is the lag in time from reporting until when a feedback loop is closed with a frontline craft. So something Innovator specifically is doing is we're trying to automate our entire system to provide instantaneous feedback. And then the next step of that is having the leadership own it and positively reinforce from the top down. So then not only are you living in the now as opposed to living in the yesterday, but you're leadership has accurate data and statistics to provide with the frontline craft, so they feel like they do have a voice. And again, leadership is where culture starts. So once you start pushing it down the lines, I think that's a very simplistic way. And the technology exists. We have the programs established. It's just a matter of innovating and improving upon. So I think most companies are almost there, but as a quick, simple focus to evolve to the next step towards that zero is just being more timely and having the message come from the leadership group.
Yeah, I love the fact that we've spent so much time with AI and automation just to give us insight so we can give that feedback fast back to our guys, so we can see that there were 6 at-risk conditions around slips on an icy patch, and we can instantly pivot and say, hey, get more ice cleats to that job and barrier that off before someone falls down. And the technology exists today to do that, but you got to think about how do you take the information on a BBO and use it in a way that workers go, well, we've been reporting that for like 3 hours and they're already telling us about it. It's in our focus audit tomorrow. It's in our toolbox talk tomorrow. And someone just got an extra 3 boxes of cleats out here because they saw what we told them. Imagine if we just did that. For me, guys, one thing I'm going to do, and it's totally based on my friends, what Steve Cathrea said about Phil. I'm getting a sticker for my hard hat that says Steve said I could do it. And every time we work for Worley, I'm gonna wear that and make sure I have that sticker. Steve said I could, and hopefully everyone will know that Steve and I are aligned on working safely. So we don't have any more time left, but if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question in the chat, if you could type it in right now, I'll pose it to the panel and we can see if we can get a couple of closing comments. Fred or Kelly or Thomas or Zach, any of you guys have any questions that you'd like to ask? And we'll get one last question or 2 answered, but I'll only go to one panelist and not the entire group. I'll give you guys a moment to type that in if you have something that you want to ask. I'm not seeing anything come in. You guys were obviously brilliant because you answered all of their questions. Gentlemen, I don't know about you guys. I thought this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. There's still a lot more that I'd love to talk about on other topics to dive into this. And if you guys are open to having another session in a month or 2 or 3, I would definitely love to have you back and continue this conversation. If we can touch 2 people, 200 people or 2,000 people with something that we've said here today, and we can stop someone from getting hurt, I think it's worthwhile. So
Cool.
I'm passionate, over the moon passionate about this. And I've created a personal moonshot that says over the next 10 years, I'm going to help 5,000 companies not hurt anyone ever again. I don't know how I'm going to measure that, but it drives my compass in terms of my actions. And I really, really appreciate each and every one of you coming on here and adding value to this conversation, because we all got to speak up, and we got to do it inside our organizations, and we got to do it outside our organizations, so that we can really try to facilitate change and improvement. Any final thoughts, guys? Michael?
Just quickly, thanks for the opportunity. It was great to see Stephen and learn from Tyler as well. And yourself, Don, your passion to touch so many people the next 10 years. My final comment would stitch together, we talked about feedback. Somebody mentioned timeliness. How do you get that information to people? And I just like to remind people, there's a lot of people in our workspaces that are craving feedback. And if you think of all the resources that the folks that work for you are constrained, right? They never have enough workforce, never have enough days in the schedule, never have enough cranes, whatever. But feedback is the one thing that they're not constrained on. And as quick as we can observe somebody do something and process it and then spit it back out, whatever that takes, we can deliver feedback to positively reinforce something really cool, or point out to somebody that there might be a safer way of what they're doing. And I like to keep myself honest on that by thinking through that. Buddy of mine coined it. He said, feedback is fast, it's free, and there's an endless supply. The only constraint is ourselves in doing that. So thanks for the opportunity. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Stephen.
Yeah, just thanks for the opportunity. I think, again, some really good conversations around concepts and kind of where we're at today. It's timely for me because I'm certainly looking at a lot of this with inside our turnaround group right now in different ways. And so I've learned a lot in chatting with you folks, which I knew I would from all our previous engagements. So very appreciative of being involved in this. And again, I think we've come a long ways. It's really a matter now of how are we going to get to the end of this and have folks bought in 100%. We can ensure that people are going to go home safely every day and do the right things when we're not looking. So I think we're at the cusp of that. It's people on this call and other leaders that are driving this. It's a passion of mine for sure. And I hope we all continue on this path together.
Thanks, Steve. Tyler.
Yeah, I'm just gracious to be on this call with you individuals and getting to learn, from your past experiences and having your knowledge imparted. I think that's really what drives safety industry wide. The culture of just sharing and networking. I tend to find more value out of sitting down with individuals like yourselves for an hour and a half than I would in a week-long course or anything along those lines. It just, to me, it's more real world and applicable experience. So I appreciate your guys' time and having me as part of this.
You're the next generation who's got to drive the passion, my friend. For me, it's real simple, guys. This is a journey. It's progress, not perfection. Take a minute, stop looking forward to zero, start looking back on progress, and take the next 100-meter dash to the next level of improving your game. And you'll, one step at a time, one person at a time, make sure everyone goes home safe. Everyone, thanks again. Really appreciate it. And for our listeners, I really appreciate it. And this will be on our podcast and on our YouTube channel in the coming days, so that hopefully we'll be able to share this conversation with 200 or 2,000 more people. So again, everyone,
Great.
Thank you so much for being my guest today. I really appreciate your input.
Thanks, Don.
Thanks.
Thanks, Don.
Bye for now.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye now. Bye now.